example, we did a project last year with Ed Ruscha for LACMA. So it was a museum fundraiser. Was one of the artists that we were most desperate to work with. And, there were 1,900 people that bought his print edition. It was a time-limited print edition, 40% of whom it was their first purchase of art.
This is The Bigger Picture, an inside look at the businesses that make the art world work and the stories behind the people that shape them. Today we're joined by Mazdak Sanii, CEO and co-founder of Avant Arte, a creative marketplace that connects leading artists with a community of collectors. This show is brought to you by Arte, the leading due diligence network specifically built for the art market and trusted by over 450 members. To understand how Arte can help you comply and succeed with challenging regulations, go to arcata.com. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start off with a question we ask everyone, which is whether you'd always had a career in the art market in mind, or whether it's something that sort of emerged as you started out.
It definitely was something that emerged over time. I started out as a classical musician. I played the French horn for a long time. Went to this very hot-housed music school up north, and then I was sort of I was making art till I was 18, quite passionately, but not I sort of stripped and redesigned an old narrowboat as my art A-level project. I was sort of really into these.
Wow, that is quite an A-level project.
yeah, it was quite involved. It was the theme was icons, so it was sort of taking fragments of different icons of contemporary art history. So the sides of the narrowboat were, we had a car company spray Mondrian panels on the sides of the boat and had Pollock on the floor and like various different, sort of a pastiche, but it was fun. So I was doing these sort of projects that I was really passionate about, but never really with a view to working in the art world. Never really with a view to working, I guess. I thought I wanted to be a poet, so I was writing lots of poetry. And then got obsessed with theory. So I studied English, but I was sort of obsessed with literary theory and critical theory. So I did my dissertation on Derrida, who, sort of art theory adjacent, or, was doing lots of things that were sort of adjacent to the art world. And then stumbled into an internship at Rothschild.
I did see that. I was a bit surprised. That's not how I imagined if someone had told me about your career would start. So how did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, it was it was quite sort of organic. My parents were academics, and I'd had this sort of humanities background, so I really had no commercial visibility at all. And then while I was studying English, lots of my colleagues at uni were getting, they knew they wanted to be a barrister, so they're getting a mini pupillage, or they knew they wanted to be a consultant. And there was sort of, I think I was at Oxford, and there was sort of a bit of a normative pull. There were these careers that people went down, and, so everyone sort of knew what they wanted to do 25 years out. And I really, I was sort of writing poetry and didn't really have this master plan, but lots of people, as I say, were getting internships and mini pupillages. And so I thought, well, I should spend my summer learning about something I don't know anything about. And so I applied. I remember on deadline day, Rothschild was the only financial institution I knew of that wasn't NatWest or a high street bank. So I applied, and they gave me an interview, and I went to the interview thinking, well, I love meeting new people, and they can't expect me to know about finance because I've just been doing music and English all this time. And they asked me a couple of sort of introductory questions, and then they said, well, how would you value a company? And
that was before ChatGPT as well. You'd actually come up with an answer yourself.
Yeah, there was no AI agent on the side of the room. So I was, I had a couple of very thin answers and I totally folded for 45 minutes. It was humiliating. And I said to them, I think the only thing that saved me was I said, before it had ended, I said, look, this has been an atomic disaster of an interview. I'm really sorry for wasting your time. I'm keen and I'll work hard. I'll pick things up quick. And they gave me a second interview, I think, off the back of that. And I was so embarrassed that I had a friend who's actually now a professor of economics, and he was, doing economics and management at the time. He gave me tutorials and I read lots of books. I was up to my eyeballs on sort of valuation theory 3 weeks later, just out of embarrassment. And they treat the second interview like a sort of job interview because they want people to sort of do the internship and stay for 25 years and become partners, whatever. And so it was a panel of 7 partners, and for an hour and a quarter,
wow,
all they asked me about was English and music. The poetic irony about this. So yeah, I did that. I got that internship and then had this crazy summer trying to sort of learn algebra again for the first time since I was about 12, and learn capitalism, I guess, for the first time because it just wasn't hadn't been my focus, and I just loved the learning curve. I loved sort of being stretched, and I was next to Magnus from Stockholm Business School, who was infinitely more qualified than me, and I had to try and find ways that I could positively differentiate myself against Magnus. So I just loved it, and then I went. That was summer 2007, and was offered a job and then joined summer 2008. So it was really mid financial crisis. So on the internship,
interesting times, right? Well, for the market, but generally, I guess.
I remember on the internship, we were sort of ordering. You could order kind of whatever you wanted on expenses. You were ordering sort of £40 steaks. This was in 2007. And then a year later, it was a very different environment. So yeah, it was fascinating. And I think it's been
useful. I know obviously you're in a different world, not a different world, but obviously a very different role. But did you take something from that experience? Did it give you a grounding in anything that you use today in your day-to-day job?
Yeah, 100%. I think, so I was my main role was sort of helping prepare businesses for a big transactional moment, whether it's an IPO or a sale, sometimes a restructuring. And so a lot of that was thinking about what's the strategy for the business? How do investors or people that would value this business look at how value is created? And so I think that is just, a strategic grounding that I, would really recommend. It's lots of late nights and, it's hard work, but it just gave you exposure to so many different business models and types. It just trained your strategic eye, I think. So yeah, I use it every day. And I think the other side of the role, I was very lucky that I was, had, someone who's now the head of the bank take me under their wing, basically because we supported the same football team. And the other side of the role, which you don't usually get that much exposure to when you're just starting your career, is really around negotiation and sort of, it's a lot of, EQ and the management of relationships. And so I think, obviously that's the art world down to a T. And so I think those two things combined have been incredibly helpful. Yeah.
You mentioned there's someone quite senior took you under their wing, and the idea in their minds that internships are kind of like first step of a trajectory that carries on. You obviously didn't stay there. You went on, I think, was it straight to Boiler Room in London? Yes. From there? Yeah. So how did your step away from that kind of climate come about? Because you're obviously quite enjoying it.
Yeah, it was. I loved it. I was there for 5 years. I think, I always... I think the reason I left was sort of twofold. One was, my mentor has an amazing job, which is very strategic and is about the management of relationships, and people hang off every word of his advice, and it's an amazing role. I think there's a chewy middle in that sort of environment. That's the 10 or 15 years between where I was and where he was, and those roles didn't inspire me very much. I didn't sort of look to the people that were in that stage with much enthusiasm or envy. And so, that was one thing. I think the other thing was just, I wanted to feel like I could connect with, the ultimate output of what I was doing. And I think, it's fascinating to learn all of these different models and get exposure to different types of businesses. But I think, it's very itinerant. You're working project by project. Even if the projects are long term, you never feel like you're really building something yourself. And, whether you're working on sort of football clubs or real estate companies, or, lots of the time you're not sort of as connected as I am with music or art. And so, yeah, it was for those two reasons that I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial, but also in culture. And I actually met the founder of Boiler Room, probably 18 months before I then left Rothschild. I joined the board and did a year of non-exec sort of advisory work with them. I mean, it was actually way more than advisory work, and I was sort of doing these crazy hours of working till the early hours on Rothschild work, and then doing Boiler Room work till the slightly later hours.
Oh, to be young again in a career.
Yeah, exactly. I always think about how my body would take it these days. But yeah,
but that sounds focused bit of learning there.
Yeah, and it was really exciting. It was sort of the company was at a very early stage in its evolution. It had sort of started as this sort of very organically as a sort of broadcast community around music events. And when I met the founder, they were just starting to think about how to professionalize and become a business, and think about revenue models and different ways of growing and sustaining. And I got involved as a non-exec, helped raise the first round of funding, and joined as COO, and that was sort of 2014. So I had this sort of I probably had a week off between Rothschild and Boiler Room, so it was a fairly swift lane switch.
And quite a different environment. So you're then straight in with artists, musicians, quite a different environment. As you say, obviously some of your advice translated quite easily, but I'm imagining the day-to-day role was quite different, quite a shift.
Yeah, definitely quite a shift. You go from an incredibly structured environment where everyone has sort of turned the wheels of what the company does 50,000 times, and there are just very established processes, and to an environment where you are creating all of those processes and ways of methods from scratch. So that was definitely a big difference. I think the other thing is which I didn't really appreciate at the time, but I think in a investment bank or a management consulting company, one of those types of environments, I think there is just such clarity of purpose. Everyone knows exactly, what they're trying to do, and what they are trying to make profit for, the bank or whatever company they're working for. And I think that unity of purpose and work ethic, and there's just certain things I probably took for granted in that sort of environment that you can't. You have to actively manage people and try and inspire them, and push in the right way. And there's just a whole load of I always think that in professional services, you don't really need to manage people, because everyone's so competitive and driven, and they really yeah, there's not the same management job that there is when you're building something from scratch. So, it was definitely.
Having learned capitalism, you then had to kind of unlearn it to reconnect and work out how to develop it. Because it's more of a community at that point, isn't it? It's not, as you're saying, it's not all about outputs and transactions.
Sure, for sure. And I think, yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, I definitely feel like I had sort of moments of overcorrection, of sort of, thinking, well, this is a really huge shift. I need to totally lobotomize and change into a different person. And actually, the value I think you bring to that environment of having seen a structured way of operating, I think is really, really significant. So, yeah, I think over time I've found that balance, I think.
So how long were you there before you sort of took a move and started setting up your own entity?
I was there 5 years. And again, maybe sort of maybe a year before I left, had met my co-founders, and we were sort of starting to explore a sale of Boiler Room, so starting to talk to potential buyers. That process dragged on, a hugely long amount of time, and I was then in dialogue with my co-founders who had started a blog that then really became the seeds of our community. My co-founders, Christine and Curtis, come from a town called Almere, which is a sort of post-industrial town outside Amsterdam. And they grew up in a moment where they didn't have any access to museums or galleries. Almere is getting its first museum this year, but at the time, they were really only able to engage with culture through the internet, and so started this blog as a way of, recording all the artists that they were discovering, and it developed a cult following, and that really became the sort of the genesis of our community. And so, they got in touch, because they were big Boiler Room fans, and they were sort of curious about how to grow a brand around an audience, how to evolve a business model around it, how to build a company. And so, yeah, it's sort of, I think had similar, there's a similar sort of sense of excitement, I think, at those really formative early stages. Whether it was, Boiler Room was sort of three full-time people when I joined, and that was pretty exciting, sort of crafting it from scratch, and Avant Arte even more so. And so we started working on how to grow the community, but also how to build a business model around it. And so that was back in 2017.
I was just about to check in on dates. So it's pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Online communities going well, not quite pandemic stage. Yeah. So can you introduce like the concept? I know you just talked about a community there. What was the sort of early idea for it and how it would grow?
Yeah, I think we've had a fairly constant idea of what Avant Arte is. And I think we've always thought about it as a curated marketplace that tries to connect, some of the world's leading artists with a new generation of both enthusiasts, but also collectors. And I think, the primary way that we've done that, I guess, is twofold. One is through having a big online audience and reaching lots of people through storytelling, content, and context, but also through edition making. So trying to make it more accessible for this new generation to start their collection. And so, on both sides, it's been fairly consistent from the early days. There's been thousands of adjustments along the way, but that sort of, that purpose and ethos has remained pretty consistent.
And I'm guessing part of that consistency, that's one of the reasons why you've been able to drive quite like such a large audience. I've already mentioned the pandemic. Can you talk us through the growth, the role I'm suspecting the pandemic played in helping that online community, and sort of how it's grown and what you think's helped you along the way in developing, particularly those really loyal audiences?
Yeah. I mean, the pandemic was, we were sort of, we'd maybe built a team of 8 people at the start of the pandemic. And by the end of the pandemic, we had a team of 45. So it was
Wow.
in a very
Growth.
formative moment for the company. And, I think when I think in March 2020, we were actually just about to launch a project with Frederick Kunath, the artist on the West Coast, who uses text in his paintings, and the text in his painting that we were launching a print edition of was The Last Perfect Day, and we were due to launch it on, I think, the 24th or maybe the 14th of March. So it was sort of when the UK went into lockdown, so we had to pause that launch. I bought the print because I thought it's just such an amazing memento of this totally crazy moment. But we were very lucky that no team members were affected, and everyone was fine. But every producer that we worked with, we didn't have our own printing house at that point. That came a bit later, and every print house, every foundry, everyone we worked with to fabricate and produce and make works shuttered, and we didn't know how long that would last. It turned out to be weeks rather than years, but I always point back to it as an example to the team as sort of where we turned I think uncertainty or adversity into a strength, because our thesis was on that particular point was that the world's going to open up asymmetrically. It's not going to be it's going to open up at different times in different geographies, and so we need coverage all over the world of the best makers. So if we need to make bronze sculpture editions in Japan, we need to be able to do that. And so did this huge research project, over the next month, and are still using the network that we built in that moment as the sort of, this sort of amazing production network of makers all over the world that we work with. And it's a big part of what we offer to artists is we can help you realize your work to the best quality in any medium. And that was, I think a lot of that was born in the adversity of shutdown, lockdowns and the shuttering and the pandemic. It was obviously really challenging time. We were very fortunate, but I think you sort of inferred the other side of it, which was many audiences were on their phones a huge amount more, and so really I think yearning for connection and inspiration, and art was a big part of that. And so we saw significant audience engagement in that period. But also people were in their domestic spaces looking at their posters and thinking this is not me anymore, and wanting to find something that connected with them. And so, we definitely also saw, a big surge in collecting interest, which I think, is not it's not a singular story to us. I think the whole art world felt that in 2021, certainly. But yeah, I think, we've tried to keep a sort of consistent approach, which has been, we need to try and do meaningful, authentic storytelling. So I think part of the reason the blog initially, and then our storytelling across various different channels has been effective is that it comes with I hope a tangible sense of excitement about working with these amazing artists and discovering new work, and that sense of that sense that you're sort of along for the journey with people that are excited to be discovering and engaging with art, I think was really helpful. And then I think, we've always really focused on trying to build long-term relationships with our audiences and with our collectors. So, we like to think we've got sort of, the best packaging out there, and try and really focus on the experience of people opening and before they live with their work, they open a beautiful box and they get a handwritten card and they have white gloves to handle it with, and just sort of certain little touches that we like to focus on, but also what communication you give them around the work and why we're excited about it, what you tell them after they purchase, because we always feel like a lot of the experience you have on the internet of buying things is it's all wonderful, and then you buy it and then you get sort of cast away for the next transaction. And so we try and keep people far more updated than we've seen elsewhere on where things are at, and things being made in our printing house and things being packaged in our warehouse, and just trying to take them along for the journey. So yeah, just trying to build relationships that endure a little longer than just buying a print and putting it on your wall, because I think that's it's ultimately the ambition for the business, is that the generation of collectors that we're now engaging with and onboarding into buying work, they might start collecting by buying $1,000 print, but can progress over many years with trust and good experiences into major collectors, major patrons over time. And so, that sort of long-term view we feel is really, really important.
You touched on loads of things there, so I'll probably work through in a sporadic order. But one of your last points there around, this being the starting point for many people in their collecting journey. So you offer quite an accessible way in. I guess prints traditionally have always been a kind of accessible entry point for the market. Do you have a lot of information around the extent to which your collectors are actively collecting in more traditional marketplaces, or to what extent you're attracting new types of buyers to collecting, as it were?
Yeah, we look really closely at that with every project. It varies, but for example, we did a project last year with Ed Ruscha for LACMA. So it was a museum fundraiser. Ed was one of the artists that we were most desperate to work with. And, there were 1,900 people that bought his print edition. It was a time limited print edition, 40% of whom it was their first purchase of art. And that really,
wow.
Yeah, it was sort of, if there was one sort of, type of statistic that really sort of exemplifies our mission, it's that sort of thing, which, trying to sort of bring on board this new generation into starting to collect, serious work of quality by amazing artists. But yeah, ideally their first purchase, and then they can continue their collecting journey beyond.
This is probably a stupid question, but do you get a feel or any data or anything around what barriers might have held them back from entering the market previously?
Yeah, we've done a couple of different insight studies over the past 2 years. One was, so last year was into looking into the new generation of collectors and their habits and behaviors and preferences. This year's was looking at how they engage with museums and different forms of patronage. But I think we definitely have seen, a lot of them talk about a lack of understanding, both on the sort of collecting side and on the, becoming a patron. So, for example, we found that 75% of the people that we surveyed, I think 3,000 people, 75% of them didn't know how to, they wanted to give more to museums, but didn't know how to. And I think
that's depressing. Okay.
It's kind of depressing. I think it's like a bit of a kick.
When you work with museums, that's really depressing. Because you're always looking for someone to give you money. So that's, wow. Okay.
For sure, but I think it's also it's also a huge opportunity if there are
nice reframe. Yeah, opportunity. Yeah.
There are thousands of people out there. I mean, and abstract that to millions of people out there who care about institutions, want to give more personally, to them financially, and they just don't understand the pathways that are clear to all of us because that's where we operate. But I think it's easier to create clarity for people than it is to convince them to want something. And so I think if we have all this sort of latent enthusiasm and willingness to support, then we need to do our job of making it clear for people.
Yeah, and you wrote, was it an op-ed for ArtNet? I think it was ArtNet, about museum funding and the need for new models. Is it new models you're suggesting, or is it, as you sort of described, more like an education or awareness raising you feel needs to be pushed, or both?
I think it is both. I think we found, so we started museum fundraising projects and partnerships a couple of years ago. So first worked with LACMA and DIA and, a range of, I'd say the majority of them are US museums, but lots now in Europe, Louisiana and the National Portrait Gallery, lots in Europe as well. And those projects typically are, they feature a storytelling campaign where we try and introduce, obviously the artists that we're collaborating with, but also the history and ethos of the museum. We then launch an edition or collection of editions with the artist. A portion of the proceeds then go to fund the museum. So, for example, last year we worked with George Condo and Dia. George very generously gave a group of 4 print editions. $2.5 million was raised for Deer in that partnership. But I think to the point I made earlier, we had 600 people buy those print editions, and the longer term idea is that they might have bought a print edition for a few €1,000, but how do we start to put them into dialogue with these institutions, and so they can be stewarded towards major giving over time? And so, I think those, new models, be they sort of time limited editions or museum fundraising partnerships, I think are important. But I totally think you're right as well. It's sort of being able to create clarity of communication. And one insight from our most recent report really blew me away, which is people are 55% more likely to spend over $500 in a museum shop if they understand that it's a way of supporting the museum, and the vast majority of people don't understand that.
That's really interesting. Is that in the US that was done? Or
this was globally.
Was it?
Yeah. And so I think we just have a job to sort of clearly communicate, but also really consistently communicate to people over time, because I think we're all awash with huge amounts of information and it's overwhelming. And I think people need both clear and consistent comms to break through that.
As you said, that is actually quite optimistic though, because there's some clear quick wins available there for museums and institutions.
Yeah, and I think
we clarify than, as you say, come up with the messaging from scratch. That's wow. Okay.
And I think we found our community were really passionate about the societal role, the cultural role that museums played. I think over 80% of them thought they played a really significant role in society, never mind, over 90% thought they played a critical role for culture. So it's not like this new generation is sort of, disengaged and just doing TikTok dance.
Oh, yeah. No, if anything, all the data and research seems to suggest they're more and more engaged with those like principles and ethics behind what they're collecting. How do you, with that in mind, like you're understanding more and more about your collectors, how they buy, what they're interested in, how do you go about sort of selecting the artists you work with and building those relationships?
So we have it depends whether it's, us working directly with artists or us working with artists and a museum. I think when it's in partnership with a museum, often that is the artists that have the closest relationship with the museum, be they, in George Condo's case, he's a board member of DIA. We're just working on a new project with Liu Fan and DIA, and Mr. Lee made a very generous donation of paintings to the museum and has an exhibition there. So it can be different sort of different reasons, but yeah, it's artists that have a really close connection with the museum, and then obviously we can pair that with our analysis of who our community care most about and who has the biggest fundraising potential and ability to reach large audiences. I think when we're working directly with artists, we have a group of 8 people who get together every week and talk. and that is really how people.
Nice job. We should be interviewing them next. That's good. I lazily earlier threw in the pandemic because it's always, I think when you're talking about how businesses are formed, when it's in like a really formative stage of business, you obviously have to mention that because, as you say, it sort of throws up a whole load of factors that you had to work on whilst you were developing your company. With that in mind, but also all the other elements you've talked about, like it's obviously been a big advance in technology, in audiences, in the art market itself, and in art, I guess. What are the key sort of challenges and opportunities as a company you think you've faced over how many years? Almost 10 years now? Is that right?
Yeah, almost.
Almost.
I think probably the greatest challenge that we face has to have been the market correction or whatever you want to call it over the last few years. And, I think we, in 2021, when there was such a sort of groundswell of enthusiasm around collecting, I think that led to, led us to scoping lots of projects in that moment that were not suited for then what happened when, we started to experience the change in the market in the middle of 2022. And suddenly we found people, were just not as interested in higher price point sculpture editions, and were not as interested in, the more emerging artist landscape. And, I think that was really, we had to have really tough conversations with, internally when people had poured all their energy into these projects, but also with artists where we were sort of trying to act in their best interests and saying, we really think that, we don't want to launch something with you that doesn't do well because that has an impact for you longer term. And, we had to sort of, it was really difficult to cancel some of those projects. And we obviously had lots and lots of time that everyone had poured into things that really would just not fit for a different environment. But I think with any of these things, whether it's the pandemic and the network of makers or with this example, we became much more diligent with how we scoped projects as a result. So, we did much more research. We were thoughtful about the mediums that were popular and successful. We were thoughtful about what felt central to the artist's work and what really people would recognize and respond to. And, there was so much that we learned in that period that we've taken forward. And, we had it was obviously a really tough, year in the art market last year. And we had our best ever year, and it's been our best ever half year this year. And I think that's all down to, focusing on the things that were within our control. And so, often use those two examples, certainly with our team, to talk about, whatever's going on outside in the world, you always have so much more agency than you think you have. But that was tough. And, there were lots of projects that I was excited to collect, and never mind excited to complete, that we, just with the best interest of the artist and, the company at heart, we just had to shift, and that was really difficult.
But I think it's a challenge everyone in the market's facing, as you say, particularly last year. I think it was beginning to be felt. There's been a lot more open conversations around how people are scaling and maneuvering. I think in quite a nice way. I think everyone's been quite open about the challenge.
Mhm.
Hopefully there'll be some cross learning. So on top of all of that, you're also a trustee, I read, at the National Youth Orchestra and the London Contemporary Orchestra. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was
You ever sleep? How do you fit those roles into your work, firstly?
also I've just had a daughter 8 weeks ago. So
Oh, how are you awake? Why am I the one holding a caffeine drink here? Well, congratulations. Is it your first?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
it's
you
my
don't look
first.
shell-shocked at all.
She's actually, I shouldn't say this in front of any new parents or parents, but she's actually the most amazing sleeper. So we've got
Don't
very.
say that out loud.
Yeah, I know, so.
This is recorded as well. What we'll do is we'll touch back with you in about 4 weeks and see how the 3-month blip goes. Oh, well, congratulations. So how do you act as a trustee as well? How does it sort of work with your company, or is it kind of like your escape almost? Because it's going back to what you originally loved, right?
Yeah, I was actually in the National Youth Orchestra when I was younger. So I played the French horn in it as a teenager, and then in the NYO I met the co-artistic directors of the London Contemporary Orchestra. So there's a sort of nice. I like it because there's a sort of circularity to it, and I sort of feel connected with similar sort of ethos of trying to help introduce younger people to culture, and that's what I've been doing for the past decade or so. But very practically with an orchestra, of course. It feels quite distinct. There's often sort of overlaps in if we're talking about sort of audio, lots of all organizations, I think, working in culture are facing similar questions of how to grow and develop audiences and how to build sustainable business models. And those are the things that I've been working on for a long time. So there are overlaps, but yeah, it doesn't feel too, maybe an escape or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I really enjoy, I also mentor the founder of a electronic music festival in Ireland, which is, amazing, and I really enjoy. I don't know. I enjoy. It's maybe going back to that sort of history of having worked on different business models and looking at different things. I really enjoy the sort of context switching.
Yeah, there's definitely some themes coming out from your career, aren't there, in terms of the skills, but also the type of challenges you enjoy.
Yeah.
On that note, we try and ask people at the end to give some advice. Not necessarily someone who wants like the same career as you, but a lot of our listeners are either starting out in the art world or probably are at junctures you've faced where you've sort of done one thing, you feel ready for the next challenge. Do you have any advice generally about how to take that next step?
I think maybe two things. I think one is I've really found having hard skills, whether they're sort of whether they're financial or numerical, commercial skills. I've found that really valuable, whichever cultural environment I've been in. I think that's been really valuable for me. So I would just whether it's sort of a night course of accounting or something that sounds slightly more inspiring than that, I would really.
I mean, you do sound like a parent now. Yeah. Maybe you're 8 weeks in, but I feel like you're already sounding like a dad. Go on.
I don't know. I feel like, I feel like it sort of feels antithetical to a career in culture to develop those skills. But I actually think that, we always talk at Avant Arte about the fact that if we can really professionalize how we manage our projects and make our operations incredibly slick, it does the opposite actually of sort of counteracting the creativity of a project. I think it creates space for either the artist or our creative teams to engage with the projects. They're not awash with project timelines and invoices or whatever it is. So I just, I think building a foundation of hard skills, I think I found really valuable. I think the second piece of advice would just be that I think careers are incredibly long, and I think you don't really appreciate that when you're starting out. And I think I think the biggest thing within that would be your reputation, your relationships, all of these things endure for far longer than any specific decision you might be making day to day. So I think if you're always running everything through the lens of 50 years rather than 50 days, I think that's really important. I think maybe tied to that, when I both was doing non-exec work for Boiler Room, but also was starting to meet my co-founders or some of the non-exec work I do now. I think, there've been moments where, I've given my time, without the expectation of anything back. And I think, you've obviously, there's lots of stories of, interns being taken advantage of, and, particularly in culture. And so I think that you've obviously got to be careful, how you deploy this. But I think I found it really valuable to have moments of sort of exploration and giving time without necessarily having to see the return, and amazing things have come off the back of that. So I think an element of that mentality, I think, could be good for some people.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something we hear a lot. I think, as you say, obviously don't take advantage of it, but a lot of us have interned or had some sort of mentoring experience that's been really crucial for helping us work out where we're going next. So I think that's a very good one. Thank you so much, particularly given you have a little one, for giving an hour of your time today. It's been really helpful and really inspiring, and lovely to hear so many different skills and turns in a career. I think a lot of people will be really inspired by it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. You can follow and subscribe to The Bigger Picture wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about this episode or to reach out to us directly, please visit us at arcata.com.